This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, global markets regained some poise today as a storm in Chinese stocks showed signs of easing. Also, we saw investors turning to the U.S. Fed for hints on stimulus tapering. Emerging market equities gained ground with MSCI's index of emerging market shares rising 0.5% on the day. South Africa's JSE was also firmer, climbing over 8%. We saw market heavyweights Naspers and Prosus each losing more than 7% over the past two consecutive sessions. Of course, after Chinese competition authorities ordered Tencent to stop exclusive music licensing deals. Now, that was not enough to drag the market down today. All indices were in the green. Industrials climbed over 25, or rather 2% today. Now, also coming up on today's show. Nigeria's central bank blocks the sale of $5.7 billion to money changers. The U.S. trade deficit in goods widens in June as imports continue to rise. And China launches the construction of a power station in the DRC capital. Well, our starting point tonight is in Nigeria. The central bank has stopped the sale of foreign exchange money to money changers in a bid to ease pressure on the local currency. Now, the move is set to halt the supply of $5.72 billion annually to the West African nation's Bureau de Changes. The Apex Bank will also stop issuing new licenses to currency trading companies, whose number has more than doubled to almost 5,500 over the past 5 years. Now, analysts say the decision could lead to an initial depreciation in the Naira's value, as of course the sudden withdrawal of supply causes an increase in the price of the dollar in the country. Well, let's now get the latest on this from Deji Badmus. He joins us in Lagos. Deji, always good to have you. Now, of course, some are saying that this is good for the country, as it will certainly help to close down bureau de changes that are pretty much exploiting official channels to sell the Naira at higher rates on the black market. But it could also lead to a major devaluation in the Naira at both official and parallel markets going forward. So what are analysts saying about this move and its impact on the Naira outlook?
Well, Uche, most analysts are saying it's a positive development, that is something good, but they're also warning that in the short to medium term, you could see what you've been talking about, that devaluation, but not devaluation, so to speak, but depreciation now. And I think we're beginning to see it. Just yesterday and today, we've seen a depreciation of the Naira in both the official market, that's what is known as the NAFEX window here, and of course the parallel market. In the parallel market, we've seen a depreciation of, say, close to 16%. So, but you know, the policy is still new. The good thing is that the CBN has actually injected about $200 million now, has actually given that to the banks now to start selling now to people. I mean, people who would need them for PTA, school fees, and what have you. Those who need 5,000 or less, which is what essentially the BDCs were doing, so to speak, until the CBN clamped down on them on that accusation that they were engaged in round-tripping and exploitation and all of that. So what most analysts are saying is that, look, this is a positive development. The worry for many is that whether the CBN will be able to stay the course, whether it will not eventually bow to pressure, because we know that most of these BDCs are operated by politically exposed persons, I mean political elites in this country. There's no question that they will begin to mount pressure on the CBN. So the argument is that if the CBN is able to stay the course, then that positive impact will be felt in the long run. Of course, in the short run, we're going to see some kind of depreciation, but that if supply is maintained, especially with the commercial banks now coming in, then we might see some stability. Uche?
Well, Deji, there is a precedent for this move. We know this is not the first time the CBN has barred foreign exchange sales to money traders in Nigeria. The last time was around March 2020, just last year. Looking at that period, did it help ease pressure on the Naira? Did it close the gap between the official and parallel exchange rates then? What makes this move this time that move more effective this time?
Well, unfortunately, it did not. I mean, it didn't ease the pressure then. As a matter of fact, when the CBN took that action sometime early last year, we saw that the Naira actually depreciated. And essentially, what was behind that was just because the CBN could actually not sustain supply. So when you do not have supply, and it's certainly going to be a problem. And don't also forget that the price of oil came down. The government was not earning as much from the sale of oil, where the bulk of the country's dollar revenue actually comes from. So all of that added to making things worse back then. But we could have the same result with this if, for instance, now that the CBN has asked commercial banks to begin to run these operations now, if the CBN is not able to provide the dollars, then you're likely going to get, when you have that scarcity, there's no question at all that we're going to see people moving back to the black market, and then certainly we would see some kind of depreciation. So it all boils down to supply. If the CBN is able to sustain the supply, both for the banks now and at the official market, then things may not be that bad. But you know, you look at the prevailing situation, look at the capital importation report released by the National Bureau of Statistics today, not very good at all. Capital importation, of course, declined by about 61% or so. And, well, the good thing is that oil at least is trading at over $70. But, you know, it remains to be seen whether whether the CBN is able to sustain that supply, which is very critical. If it's able to sustain the supply in the medium to long term, then, well, I think would all be good.
Right. Well, let's talk a bit about these bureau de change operators, because the CBN governor had some quite strong words for them. He said they abandoned the original objective to serve retail users who need $5,000 or less, and instead they became wholesale dealers. Now, to what scale was this happening, and have we heard any response on this move from the Association of Bureau de Change Operators in Nigeria yet?
Well, first, the Bureau de Change Operators have actually not issued a formal statement yet. Their chairman actually said yesterday that they were waiting to get a formal circular from the CBN before reacting. But there's no question at all that the BDCs have actually not been compliant with you know, the guidelines now set up by the CBN. No question at all. And there's also no question at all, too, that in terms of oversight functions now, that the CBN is not able to effectively carry out oversight functions on the BDCs to check their operations, if you like. So, and it's true that in most cases you find that most of them sell beyond the price, for instance, stipulated by the CBN. They engage in round tripping and all of that. So most of the accusations leveled against them by the CBN, I think, is public knowledge. But the problem is that effective oversight had always been lacking and would always be lacking, especially when it comes to BDC operations. But with the banks, the expectation is that things would be different. The CBN has proper oversight now on the bank, so it will be able to check their operations, to check abuse. For instance, the CBN has asked people to report when they go to banks and they do not get their dollar needs, that they should report. It's actually set up a hotline for people to call in and all of that. So it was always going to be difficult for the CBN to properly regulate the activities of the BDCs. And everybody knows that the BDCs to a large extent, had not complied with the rules. And that's why the CBN had to wield the big stick. But the question, as I said earlier, is whether the CBN is able to sustain this policy in the long run, not bow to pressure, and then we see whether the policy would be effective.
And I guess that's my next question, Deji, because you just mentioned the CBN released about 200 billion naira, or dollars rather, to commercial banks. But given the fact that foreign currency reserves still remain under pressure, realistically, will commercial banks be able to manage and meet the demand for dollars in the country?
Well, that will be a challenge for the central bank, because the truth is that if the central bank does not run a proper check on these commercial banks, it's difficult to see the commercial banks themselves will want to take advantage of these and make some kind of profit the same way the BDCs were operating. So, but then, the way it is, the question is, will the CBN be able to sustain supply? No question at all. The foreign reserve is coming under enormous pressure. As I told you about the capital importation report, not too good. So we're not having this huge number of investments now, whether by foreign direct investment or foreign portfolio investment. I mean, that has gone down. The half-year report released by the National Bureau of Statistics indicated 61.1% decline, and that is really troubling. We don't know what the second half of the year would bring. But as I said, the good thing for Nigeria, the price of oil still hovers above $70 per barrel. And another good news is that you look at that OPEC deal just a few weeks ago that increased Nigeria's production output, adding about 400,000 barrels per day. That, of course, could be very helpful, even though it's going to happen in 2022. But truth is that if the sources of foreign earnings for this country do not actually pick up, it's difficult to see how the central bank can sustain this. And of course, the same challenge that we've had with the BDCs, we might have with the banks. But should the CBN sustain dollar supply, then, as I said, everyone would be happy, and then the naira will definitely not come under pressure. We might have some kind of stability in the foreign exchange market. But, you know, fingers crossed. Let's just wait and see how everything pans out.
Quite right. Fingers crossed. Many thanks, as always, Deji, for those great insights. That, of course, is Deji Badmus joining us there in Lagos. Well, let's head to South Africa now. The government is expected to inject $2.4 billion to support businesses and individuals affected by the recent unrest in the country. Now, this follows the easing of measures by President Cyril Ramaphosa on Sunday. The interventions are to be funded by better government revenues and shifting around of spending. Here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola with the details.
The damage was extensive in several areas, and businesses looking to rebuild have turned to their insurers for claims to be processed and paid. South African state-owned insurer Sasria will settle valid claims for damage caused by public violence, strikes, riot and unrest.
But I think one mustn't underestimate the psychological impact. The nature of the violence, the manner in which it escalated within 2 or 3 days, and the fact that the malls were in the first line of attack. It has been quite a emotional and psychological impact on the industry as a whole.
The damage to the country's economy was also significant.
I think the vulnerability displayed through these attacks, as well as, you know, the actual quantum and reach of, you know, 40 billion plus damage and all of that unemployment, you know, brought to a head all of the, I suppose, cracks in the foundation of the country from an economic, political, and I suppose, you know, social perspective.
The situation in several damaged shopping malls in KwaZulu-Natal is complicated by additional criminal activity.
We've had incidences of the construction mafia that have now invaded these sites and demanding payment. So, you know, that puts a whole new spin on whether you want to actually redevelop. And not forgetting that it is a quite complex situation where a lot of these property owners have huge bonds that they've taken from banks to build these shopping centers. So it's not something you can just, you know, dust your hands off and leave.
Foreign investors that are invested or thinking about getting involved in South African businesses understand the risks and rewards.
We've actually had a couple of conversations in the last week with some international buyers, and most are seeing it as an isolated event. I think the $1 million is, where to from here, and what does the next couple of weeks look like? Is it a downward spiral, or is there going to be hopefully a little bit of a recovery and governments putting some fundamental interventions in place?
Economists have begun to quantify the damage to the country's economic growth.
So we try to get a sense just of the reduction in economic activity before you look at the damage to assets. And we estimated that to be 40 basis points impact on the growth. So our base case scenario was for growth around 2.7%. That has since fallen to 2.3%.
The country was struggling to emerge from a recession before COVID struck, and then the arson and looting occurred in the country's two major economic hubs. It set the country back and will require all hands on deck to restart the economy. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And now look at our corporate headlines today. Zimbabwe approved the Johnson & Johnson vaccine for emergency use after previously blocking it as the Southern African nation struggles to contain a surge in COVID-19 cases. Now, Acting Director for the Medicine Control Authority of Zimbabwe, Richard Rukwata, said in a statement the use of the drug is valid for 12 months or when the public health emergency ends. Meanwhile, Impala Platinum, the third largest source of South African SA Platinum Group metals, has flagged at least $215 million rise in headline profits for its year to end June. That was boosted by higher production and elevated precious metal prices. Now, refined output of the 6 PGMs Implats producers rose 16.3% to 3.2 million ounces to end June, while revenue ounce sold is expected to increase by 58.8% to $2,663 per ounce. Meanwhile, Maersk Line and CMA CGM are redesigning their network to enhance their service delivery to 2 Kenyan commercial ports to offer more flexibility to customers' supply chains. Now, the shipping companies announced a number of changes to serve the Mombasa and Lamu ports. Maersk stated that it is enhancing the service it offers from Mombasa to North Europe by providing a single transshipment product via Salalah. And Boeing posted its first quarterly profit in almost 2 years as deliveries of its best-selling 737 MAX jets to airlines gained traction amid a sharp rebound in travel bookings following an increase in global COVID-19 vaccinations. Now, the 737 MAX is integral to Boeing's financial recovery as the U.S. plane maker scrambles to recoup billions of dollars in lost sales from the pandemic, the safety scandal caused by 2 fatal 737 MAX crashes, and of course, deal with structural defects. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's now take a short break, but still coming up on the show. The government and private sector agree to upgrade Egypt's railway network. And Nigerian motorists are struggling with the high costs of fuel.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how whole stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Well, let's head to Egypt now, where authorities have signed an agreement with close to a dozen private sector companies to manage and upgrade the country's railway network. The decision, which has been on the table since 2018, has been fast-tracked after a series of accidents that have been blamed on mismanagement and outdated infrastructure. Well, here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with more details from Cairo.
Egypt's railway sector is undergoing a multi-billion-dollar overhaul to improve the quality of transport services. Decades of negligence have led to numerous tragic accidents that have cost the lives of hundreds of Egyptians. The upgrade includes installing new rail carriages, railway lines, signaling systems, and the latest safety technology. But the government feels this is not enough to ensure better services for its 5 million passengers who ply the network every day.
We are talking about the need for a strong management that could run this vital sector, while the world is giving extra attention to the railway, underground, monorails, and light transport. I believe the failure of the current system here is due to the low-skilled human element and bad management.
It's these reasons that have made the government turn to the private sector to manage the rail network. Almost a dozen local companies have been tasked with managing the traditional railway system, as well as the newly introduced electric train, the high-speed trains, trams, and monorails. Despite the decision being unpopular with the public, authorities have assured that all the railway and underground transport is not being privatized and will still be owned by the state.
I fear the private companies will raise the ticket prices. For example, the prices for tickets on the new Spanish and Russian carriages or first class is 100 Egyptian pounds a ticket, which at the moment is expensive. Imagine the price when it's privatized. Same for all tickets.
I think it will be a success and people need this. It's also facilitating quicker transportation for people. Train services are slowly improving and the passengers feel safer now and can see the continuous upgrade in the transport system.
Experts say the management companies have a tough mission in their hands to run the crucial transport service.
The private sector is required to be productive. Productive means high-quality output and achieve profitability for an institution that is posting annual losses. We need to improve the human resources. The president has ordered establishing academies. We should also hire skilled labor and give them good training agenda programs and be always up to date with continuous improvements, especially the technical aspect.
Maintenance work, which has been neglected for years, will also be monitored by the private companies. The government hopes the partnership will cut down on accidents in the railway sector and turn it into a profitable industry. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And heading to Nigeria now, where motorists are grappling with the high cost of fuel. A hike in pump prices has seen the cost of petrol rise more than 28% year-on-year in June 2021. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam reporting.
54-year-old cabbie Mushinwa Vitalis has spent the past 7 years running his cab business in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. He transitioned from the regular flag down and pick to the digital ride-hailing app and now operates both to maximize profit. But lately, business has been tough for transporters like Vitalis due to the incessant hike in fuel pump prices.
When the fuel is increased, the price of fare will not even be increased. So it is affecting us much. So that is the area is affecting us. What we make in a day, we won't be able to make it again. When the customers are not ready to increase on their own side, then it will totally reduce our income.
Like Vitalis, many motorists have continued to bemoan the rising cost of petrol. A report from the Bureau of Statistics shows the cost of a litre of petrol in Nigeria surged by 82.5% year-on-year in June of 2021. That's from 128 naira to the current average retail price of 165 naira.
The increase in the price of petroleum products is simply responding to the weak macroeconomic fundamentals, especially in the value of the local currency, which is the naira vis-a-vis international currencies.
Government sources put Nigeria's petrol consumption at 50 to 60 million litres daily. That's notwithstanding the reduced economic activities triggered by the COVID-19 induced slowdown and insecurity. The state-owned oil company reports that, as at March 2021, the government paid $294 million monthly to subsidize the cost of petrol following a surge in demand. But experts say this does not reflect the current economic realities.
If you have more factories closing, more unemployment, so much insecurity that people can't even go to their farms, how can we justify this kind of consumption? There is no evidence that we are consuming 60 or 50 million litres of petroleum every day. Rather, there is evidence that if we were doing 35 in early 2015, we should be doing not more than 2025 today.
Though there was a 1.46% decline recorded in the cost of petrol, it's not significant enough to make a positive impact on the economy.
I will let the price of petroleum float so that this idea of subsidy to enrich a few fat cats in the corridors of power will stop. But there's also the challenge, the people are already impoverished. There's so much poverty, there's so much unemployment, there's so much insecurity. This will happen when we have a discerning government.
Nigeria is Africa's biggest oil producer and 6th largest in the world, yet it spends heavily on fuel importation. Its refineries are dated and do not function at optimum capacity. Experts are calling for an end to the subsidy regime and monies directed into rebuilding the nation's refineries. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
And staying in Nigeria, the rising cost of aviation fuel in the country is also putting a strain on the sector. With an average 50% surge in fuel prices, cost of airfares have nearly doubled. Here's CGTN's Kelechi again with more details on that story.
These are not the best of times for passengers here at the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport in Abuja, Nigeria's capital, with the soaring cost of airfares fueled by a surge in the cost of aviation fuel, also called Jet A1. Passengers lament their ordeal.
I'm flying to Lagos. Today I paid 57,000 naira for a Dana flight to Lagos. But then it was not like that before. 3-4 months ago, it cost less than 40,000 naira.
Flight cancellations too have become rampant.
The fare for yesterday that I booked was 78,850, and then today now they are telling me 680,000 naira, and I don't have such money to book a flight ticket that I have already booked and it was cancelled.
In 2016, the Jet A1 was sold at 110 naira per litre. Recently, the price rose to between 250 and 300 naira per litre in the south and north, respectively. Several factors, including inflationary pressures, exchange rates, logistic challenges of importing and distributing the products, are responsible for the price hike.
In the last 5 years, the foreign exchange rate has almost doubled, from about 215 naira to now over 400 naira at official window.
Airlines spend up to 40% of their operating cost on aviation fuel. Despite being the world's 6th largest oil producer, Nigeria is still unable to refine the product locally, making it susceptible to external forces.
What we can do, number one, is to give them special rates. Secondly, is to give them low interest bearing loans.
Nigeria's aviation industry lost nearly $500 million in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. The sector has been grappling to survive the many other challenges bedeviling it. Industry players say this could have dire consequences and pose a threat to the growth of the sector if not promptly addressed. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
And still in aviation, South Africa's Mango Airlines has been temporarily suspended. The low-cost airline failed to honor its debt with air traffic navigation services. And this, of course, is now the second time that this airline has been grounded because of a debt. Here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu with more on that story.
Travelers were caught off guard when Mango made the announcement Tuesday afternoon. The airline has agreed to compensate passengers with vouchers for future flights, but was unable to give any guarantees on when it would start flying again.
What is happening is we've reached a stalemate with our creditors, and one of them is ATNS. And then ATNS, they do our air traffic navigation solution. So we owe them money. So as a result, we had discussions, and what transpired is they decided that we cannot fly because we owe them. And this is where we are.
Mango Airlines, a subsidiary of SAA, has been waiting for government disbursements since last year. But there's been ongoing delays, which has left the airline in a mountain of debt.
Part of the issue is it had to go through an appropriations bill, which was gazetted and approved. The money should be coming to Mango at any time. The reason why there's a delay, we can't explain it because, our understanding and expectation was that that money should have been with Mango a long time ago. As early as of yesterday already. So why it hasn't flown, we're not too sure, but we are still engaging DPE. So the money should flow anytime from now.
But it's a little too late, especially for staff who haven't been paid for months. The unions also pleaded with the courts to place the airline into business rescue.
The problem is that Mango has been a subsidiary of SAA since it was founded in 2005. So we've never really had a chance to see how it's been doing financially. And now in the application or the court papers for this business rescue, now we see that it's been doing okay, but it hasn't had a chance or an opportunity to build up its own reserves on its own balance sheet because it's been very much part of SAA. So that means that it hasn't been as resilient, as strong as, let's say, FlySAF Areas or Airlink, or even perhaps Comair Kalula BA. It hasn't had the resources to carry it through the COVID lockdown and pandemic and the loss of passengers, etc., etc.
Senior Mango executives are currently negotiating with ATNS on a temporary payment to get the airline back in the air. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
began holding guns, machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
I try to not let it affect me, but there are days when it does. I'm a human being, and to see patients in a hospital bed and their family members are not there, there's no one there to hold their hand, that human touch, you know?
I just hope everyone can remember that the situation is not permanent and that everything will get better eventually.
Welcome back. Well, let's turn our attention to international news. The U.S. trade deficit in goods has increased in June, of course, as inputs continue to rise amid strong economic activity. Now, the rebound is attributed to massive fiscal stimulus, low interest rates, and vaccinations against COVID-19. However, restrictions in the supply chain have hampered production boost. The Commerce Department further adds that the trade deficit of goods surged 3.5% to $91 billion last month, as imports of goods advanced 1.5% to $236 billion. That's amid increases in imports of food, industrial supplies, and of course capital goods. And moving on to the UK now, the government is expanding its COVID testing amongst essential workers after businesses there reported widespread absences of staff who of course are required to self-isolate. Now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is urging the public to remain cautious despite a week of lower case numbers in the country. Here's Nicole Johnston reporting.
How do you keep businesses open when hundreds of thousands of people are being asked to self-isolate at home because of a potential exposure to coronavirus? Well, that's the dilemma facing the British government and businesses like supermarkets. But now the government has decided to expand its testing so that people can take a daily COVID test rather than having to sit at home isolating. It's going to open 1,200 testing sites for people working in 24 sectors, including not only supermarket workers, police and fire brigade staff, but also people working in communications, defence, border control and prisons. But for the rest, self-isolation is still the requirement.
I know that people have been frustrated about the pinging and the self-isolation. I totally understand that, particularly now as we're starting to see some better figures. But I think everybody understands that this is still a very dangerous disease. We do need to use the tools that we have. Self-isolation is the one that we've got. I urge people to do it.
Meanwhile, the epidemiologist who did the modelling which sent the UK into its first lockdown, Professor Neil Ferguson from Imperial College, says that the UK could be looking back on the pandemic by October. He says that the R rate, the reproduction rate, appears to be under 1, which means that the epidemic isn't growing. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says that the country is not out of the woods yet.
I've noticed that obviously that we're 6 days into some better figures, but it is very, very important that we don't allow ourselves to run away with premature conclusions about this. The step 4 of the opening up only took place a few days ago. People have got to remain very cautious, and that remains the approach of the government.
Rates of infection have been falling in the UK over the last week, but scientists say that it could be due to school holidays and warm weather. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
Now, bees, butterflies, insects, they all depend on wildflowers for sustenance. But intensive farming, pollution and now urbanization have shrunken wildflower meadows. Well, conservationists are now calling for more efforts to help restore these vital hubs of diversity. Take a look.
An English wildflower meadow, part of a traditional landscape, native flowers hidden in long grass. A busy hub of biodiversity too, with butterflies, grasshoppers, beetles and much more. But these areas are scarce. Conservationists estimate the majority of UK wildflower meadows were lost in recent decades. The World Wildlife Fund says it's concerned.
Partly because they have their own intrinsic value and are critically important for a whole range of wildlife, but also because they are a mirror on what is happening more broadly across all types of habitat and our mismanagement of nature.
In the past, farmers were pressured to maximise production, aerial spraying this valley with pesticides. But when organic farmers took over the land, they transformed it, allowing wildflowers to evolve. The valley is now alive with oxeye daisies and lady's bedstraw, spotted moths on blue scabious flowers, and bee numbers boosted, contributing to nature's cycle.
So more insect life, more pollination, more insect life, more songbird life, because they love the insects. More songbird life, more birds of prey.
For some bee species, it's already too late. Many gone for good.
The main reason that pollinators like bees have declined is just there aren't enough flowers in the modern world. We've created a kind of landscape that's almost completely devoid of flowers, in fact. And if you're a bee, that's your only source of food.
Conservationists want to restore more areas like this. 100 flower types can grow in one field. The more variety, the more insects. But while many enjoy wildflowers, modern farming can be detrimental. Chemicals wiping flowers from crop fields. But those crops need insects to pollinate them too.
We need to find a balance, but we've gone way too far in the wrong direction. And there are many, many farms with almost no biodiversity left at all. And that isn't sustainable in the long term. We need insects.
There are now schemes to encourage nature-friendly farming, leaving flowers growing wild in some fields, these foxgloves proving perfect for bees. Carefully conserved wildflower fields like this one are full of life and colour. But these are isolated pockets. In many other places, the species that thrive right here are struggling. Roadside flowers help connect these pockets. Increasingly, authorities like Highways England let grass verges grow, allowing nature to flourish.
You form corridors of good habitat to allow animals, with birds, mammals, insects, to move between these islands, and gradually their populations will recover.
Every small area helps. Flowers filter pollution and sequester carbon, doing their bit for climate change. Some flower fields are planted intentionally too, brightening up prospects for nature, creating colour and a bee sanctuary. And when chemicals can be avoided, the difference is clear, allowing nature to recover and flowers to grow and grow. Kitty Logan, CGTN, Oxfordshire.
Well, let's now head to the east of China, where Typhoon Infa has left a trail of destruction in several areas, damaging crops and disrupting livelihoods. Well, CGTN's Gao Ang now finds out how one pear farmer in Zhejiang province is trying to recover.
Zheng Yongsen says the impacts of Typhoon Infa are some of the most serious he's witnessed since 1995, when he started growing plants. He says he tried to save as many pears as possible before the storm hit, but over 5 acres of pears still went to waste.
They're priced at over 6 yuan per kilogram. This amounts to a loss of nearly 18,000 yuan per acre.
Although this pear looks fine, Zheng tells me that after falling down, it has started to rot the next day. Then it can't be sold anymore. And now there are over 700 kilograms of pears just like this one. Zheng tells me Infa was very different from other typhoons, not just in speed and strength, but also in impact. Volunteers have been helping him saving his remaining pears. They store them in a refrigerated container to be delivered to nearby cities.
This year, we adopted weather index insurance. Damages are determined based on wind speed. We'll get compensation if it reaches a certain level.
Zheng says one good thing about pears is that it can remain tasty even after a long storage. Besides Zhejiang, Infa has also damaged crops and flooded farmlands in neighboring Jiangsu province. Although it has weakened, floodwaters are still at warning levels in several areas, and alerts remain for potential disasters. Gang, CGTN, Zhejiang province.
And on that note, let's take a look at commodity markets today. Gold prices firming up on Wednesday above the key psychological level of $1,800 per ounce on the back of a weaker dollar. Now, though gains were curbed by investor caution in light of a U.S. Fed meeting today, traders say that gold continues to benefit from some hedge buying by investors. Meanwhile, oil prices rising towards $75 a barrel ahead of an industry report expected to show U.S. crude inventories dropped more than expected. Now, the report brought focus back to a tight supply and demand balance in the market rather than the rising coronavirus infections. And prices of copper continue to hover near their multi-week highs, scaled in the previous session as investors bet on a strong outlook for the metal in the second half of this year. Well, on that note, let's take a short break now, still to come. China launches the construction of a power station in the DRC capital. And locals partner with Airlines to help residents affected by recent riots in South Africa.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines.
one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo has launched the construction of a power substation in the capital, Kinshasa, in order to help increase residents' access to electricity. The construction of the station is being funded by the Chinese government as part of its mission to boost trade and development with the Central African nation. Here's CGTN's Chris Ochamringa with that report from Kinshasa.
Deepening economic ties. China and the DRC have officially launched the construction of a 220 kilovolt electricity substation in the capital, Kinshasa. The Kinsuka station will be the first automated distribution network in the DRC.
This is the first big energy project that we are jointly carrying out with the DRC government. It's in line with the DRC's vision of improving access to electricity this year. It's a complete step we've both made in developing the country's infrastructure.
The construction of the $200 million project is being done by China's Shanghai Electric Company. According to the World Bank, the DRC has one of the lowest electrification rates in Africa due to its high poverty rates and untapped hydropower potential. The electrical substation under construction over there is one of the latest Chinese-funded projects in the DRC. It's expected to provide electricity to more than 2 million Kinshasa residents when it's completed next year. Congolese authorities have hailed China for partnering with them to increase the supply of electricity in the city.
Vous savez, la ville de Kinshasa
Kinshasa has become a mega city because the population is growing rapidly. It has exceeded 3 million inhabitants in 20 years. We now have a population of 15 million people. Our energy needs have also increased. We thank the Chinese for supporting us in this initiative.
The DRC is China's fifth largest trade destination in Africa because of its vast mineral resources. Their cooperation is rooted in China's Belt and Road Initiative, which seeks to build infrastructure, including roads, railways, and power plants, to boost trade between China and the rest of the world. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Now, with the help of local airlines, South Africans are lending a hand by sending food supplies to those affected after days of unrest and violent looting. Now, KwaZulu-Natal was the hardest hit province where retail stores were ransacked and set alight. The main roads to the province were also cut off following the unrest, making it harder to transport food. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with the latest.
Private airline Semair joined the call to fly much-needed aid to KwaZulu-Natal. The province was completely cut off by road after days of violent unrest and looting.
We took about 4 tons a time on our flights that were going into both Margate and to Durban. We had low passenger volumes and supply coming down to Durban, obviously people not wanting to get in, but so we used that to effectively take space and put the relief efforts into the aeroplanes and get it down to Durban and to get it down to Margate.
Residents in areas where shops were completely destroyed were left desperate without the supply of basic goods.
Large number of requests for medicine, so emergency supplies, chronic medications such as insulin. More than that, it was babies' nappies and baby formula, and then fresh supplies, so bread, simple staple dietary items, bread, cooking oil, and some tinned products. People were panicking, not sure when would supplies return.
Passenger airline FlySafair also changed its operations as relief efforts grew across the country.
We ran a specific program where we allowed some of our customers to take goods with them free of charge. So that was moved through the airport terminal as effectively checked luggage, but the folks were allowed an extra piece. So that was half a ton per flight that we operated.
Shortages of products in other parts of the country also started to appear. Durban houses the biggest port in South Africa, but goods could not be moved along the main corridor between Durban and Johannesburg.
Yeast for bread baking that is produced in the KZN region, and there was due to be a bit of a shortage up in Gauteng as a result of the fact that the roads were severed effectively. So that was one of the more kind of commercial operations. We gave a favourable rate to the producers of yeast, who then flew that up to Joburg.
Life is slowly returning to normal in KwaZulu-Natal. Shops are restocking and more people are venturing out of their homes. But in many areas where stores have been destroyed, people are travelling long distances to get basic supplies. Julie Shire, CGTN.
And before we leave you today, a quick look at Africa's currencies. South Africa's rand losing 0.2%, with losses since last week pushing it into the red for the year. Meanwhile, a lot of eyes were on the Naira today after the CBN banned the sale of dollars to Bureau de Changes. We saw the Naira depreciate across forex markets, falling slightly against the dollar on the parallel market to hover around 411 Naira per dollar. At the parallel market, it closed at around 505 Naira per dollar from 504 the previous session. And that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest.